your name, your pronouns, where you're coming in from. Just so you know, we are now recording this meeting. So if you're not comfortable with that, that would be a good time to leave or go off camera or do whatever you need to do to feel comfortable. We will be later sharing this out for folks who couldn't be here today, and I believe posting it on YouTube. So welcome to our session on leading effective one-to-ones and organizing conversations. And also, by the way, if you want to share when you're introducing yourself, anything you're hoping to learn or talk about today, anything you're excited about, anything else you'd like to share, feel free to do that as well. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we are going to get started. So first I'll say, for those who don't know me or who are watching this later on, my name is Spencer Reed. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Movement Politics Director here at Renew US. And I'm based in Rhode Island at the moment. I grew up in Vermont and then bounced around a lot. I was out in the Midwest for a number of years, which is where I did a couple of things, including working for the Bernie Sanders campaign out in Iowa and then Michigan and a few other states as well in 2020. That was really my path into professional political organizing work. I learned a whole heck of a lot there and have been doing it ever since. Came out to Rhode Island to manage a state Senate campaign here for a woman named Cynthia Mendes, who's now running for lieutenant governor here and is fantastic and a very close friend. And I've been at Renew since the 2020 election, helping lead our training program and some of our other political work, our partnerships across the states. And I am really a firm believer in the power of conversations and one-to-ones in organizing. I think they're one of the most important things that we can do. In fact, they are the most important thing that we can do. Jen and I have a running debate about whether field or comms is more important in the campaign. I will say that I think that conversations are the heart of organizing. And if you're not having conversations, you're not organizing. And if you're not organizing, you're losing whatever fight it is, whether it's a campaign or an advocacy issue or anything else. But we'll continue that discussion another time. For now, I get to talk about the importance of one-to-ones and organizing conversations and why I think they're so important and some things that I think are important in leading them effectively. So first, I'm going to go over the agenda, what we're doing today. We're going to start off with our plan for the day. That's this. Then we're going to do some quick group norms, then a grounding in our axiom of the day. We're going to have a couple axioms throughout because, it wouldn't be me if I wasn't sharing some axioms. We'll talk about what those are if you're not familiar. We're going to talk about what one-to-ones actually are and why they're important. A couple of key principles that I think are good to keep in mind whenever we're holding a one-to-one or an organizing conversation. We're going to go over the 6 steps of what I consider to be an effective organizing conversation. We're going to talk about some different variants, especially for the management context and how we approach this as a project of coaching. Then we're going to talk about where we go from here together, some other ways to get plugged in with our work and some other cool opportunities we have coming up. And we're going to do a checkout. Does that sound good to everybody? Could I get a thumbs up or a thumbs up in the chat or something if that is exciting to you, if you're feeling good? And thumbs down if you have some questions or concerns or you want to talk about something else in a little bit more depth before we jump in. Okay, looks like we are feeling good. So I'm going to keep going. We're going to start off with some group norms. So first, when you're not talking, please stay on mute. But when you do want to talk, I see Kim, I see you raise your hand. Do you have a question or a comment or something you'd like to jump in with?
No, sir. That's this horrible device I'm on that did that unintentionally. I put a thumbs up. Apologize. Got it.
All right. Well, if you have anything you'd actually like to say, drop something in the chat and I'll call on you. Otherwise, I will ignore it when you put your hand up in Zoom. So that's actually a great example of where if you do have something you'd like to say, a great way to do that is to drop the word stack in the chat. Stack, that means you're adding yourself to the list of people who would like to speak. I'm jumping a little ahead on the group norms here, but when you do have something to share, go ahead and do that. Or use the chat. Just share your thoughts, your questions. I will keep an eye on the chat and try to answer questions that come up there. So use the chat, talk to each other, talk to me, talk to everybody. When you have a question, though, it's great, very helpful for me if you put all caps question and then whatever the question is so that I notice it in the chat and make sure to get to it. Remember to step up and step back. This is a pretty short period of time. You got a lot to get through. So if you find yourself taking up a lot of space, maybe take a step back. But if you have something interesting or worthwhile to share, don't be afraid to speak up, drop it in the chat, put yourself in a stack and share. And while both matter, impact is more important than intent. And so if something happens where I or anybody else does something that is causing some harm to somebody else on this call, then we're going to own that. We're going to talk about it. And don't be afraid to say, hey, I had a problem with that. Let's talk about it. Does this feel good to everybody? Can I get, again, a thumbs up if you're feeling good about these norms, and a question in the chat if you have any questions. Okay, again, looking like we're feeling good. I'm going to keep going for the sake of time, but don't hesitate to drop questions that you have in the chat about this or about anything else that comes up throughout. So now we're going to do our grounding for the day, and it's a very simple one. We're going to ask you to think about what you are fighting for. What are you fighting for? And take a minute and write it down in the chat. It could be something simple. It could be 1 or 2 words, or it could be something a little longer, a story or an experience you've had recently that's really inspiring you or that's driving you to fight for justice here. So take a minute, write that in the chat, and don't send it yet. I'll let you know when to say send, and I'm going to give everybody just a minute to write this down. So take a minute to do that, and I'm going to say send in a minute. Another 20 seconds. Okay, get ready. And on the count of 3, we're all going to send that in the chat. 1, 2, 3, send. What are we fighting for? And take a few minutes to read over those answers, because there's a lot of them. There's a lot of great answers in here already. Add yours if you haven't added it yet. And I'm not going to read them out just because there's too many good ones and they're all good, but again, do read them and think about what you see that you're also fighting for, because I'll bet you that most of what everybody else is saying is going to resonate with you as well. And if something really sticks out to you, feel free to send that person a DM and say, hey, let's talk about that. That's something I'm excited about fighting for too. So thank you all for doing that. Let's stay grounded in that, because that is why we're here. That is why we're doing this, right? That's why these conversations are important, because that is what is at stake for us. That's one of the things we're going to be talking about, is what is at stake for us here. Now, our axiom of the day, for those who don't know, this is from my favorite little booklet of axioms for organizers by Fred Ross Sr. I've always got a copy nearby. He's a labor and civil rights organizer. And this one I like quite a lot. I like most of them quite a lot. An organizer is a leader who does not lead, but gets behind the people and pushes. Any reactions to that? I'll take 1 or 2 people aloud, and any thoughts in the chat. Reactions to this? How do you feel about it? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Does it resonate with you? Does it make you think of anything else? Do you think it's relevant to what we're talking about today? Share in the chat or drop yourself in Stack, and I'll call on you and bring 1 or 2 people off mute. Any other reactions? I imagine some people are typing, so I want to give you time to do that. If you find yourself typing something really long and you want to just say Stack and come off mute instead, that's totally fine as well. Yuri likes it a lot. Laura says, I like the image of being behind people who are already facing somewhere. Rachel says it's anti-figureheads, which is good. Yeah, I like all these reactions. Mara agrees. The role of an organizer is not the traditional leadership role, and that's important to keep in mind. Yeah, when we think of leaders, we think of certain things. Yuri says, it makes me think that the best leaders are serving. Yeah, I think that's insightful. Awesome, we'll keep on sharing those things out. I love all of this. And I think the reason I chose this one today is because I think that one-to-ones are the way we get behind people and push. That's how we figure out where they are and how to get behind them. And then that's how we push. And I'll talk about what that means to me in a few minutes. But feel free to share any other thoughts again in the chat. So first, what is a one-to-one? When we talk about that, I know when I first started doing professional organizing, people would just drop that term, and I didn't really know what they were talking about, but I was scared to ask because everybody else knew what it meant. And it turns out it's actually something really simple. It's just a one-on-one conversation. That's all it really is. Now, there is a purpose to them, and it's a little more than just a one-on-one conversation because they have a purpose. And the purpose is to move the person you're talking to action or to elevate their leadership, to bring them up the ladder, to give them more of a leadership role, to encourage them to take on some new leadership. This could be with a supporter or a member of your organization or a volunteer or a staff member or an external organizational partner or a lot of other things, or anybody who might become one of those things, even if they aren't already one of those things, because we might be trying to escalate them to that. I actually think I think that pretty much all organizing conversations on some level are one-to-ones. And so whether you're knocking doors for a campaign, or you're organizing in a workplace, or you're meeting with someone that you manage or a consistent volunteer, I think all of those things are fundamentally organizing conversations. And whenever you're having a one-on-one conversation with somebody on some level, you are holding a one-to-one. Now, it's important that a one-to-one, the difference between a one-to-one, one of the key differences between a one-to-one and just a conversation is that a one-to-one has a clear purpose, a goal, a desired outcome. You go into it, and if you're calling the one-to-one, if you're proposing, if you're leading it, you should have clarity before you even suggest it of why you are doing that. What are you attempting to accomplish? What do you think the goal of this thing is? And part of the purpose also is almost always building or strengthening your personal relationship with the person you're talking to. So that's a really important component of all this as well. There's this mix of different things. Does anybody else have any quick overall thoughts that you want to drop in the chat? Alexis says, I agree, because as someone who sometimes needs a little bit of a push, it's helpful for someone to push me out of my self-imposed cage. I love that. Thank you so much for that perspective, Alexis. Does anybody else have any reactions to anything I've said so far or additional thoughts to share? Again, feel free to drop those in the chat if so. Also, by the way, I know I talk very quickly, so feel free to give me one of these or drop in the chat and say slow down if I'm going a little too fast or speaking too quickly. Any other thoughts to share, reactions to any of this? I'll say just quickly while I'm waiting for that. Oh, I see Mar says, I like the point that it's important to focus on the building of the relationship. Building trust is so crucial. I totally agree. Thank you, Mar. To Alexis's point, I'll say, I love, my favorite dumb joke is, does anybody know who discovered water? Well, neither do I, but it wasn't a fish. And that's because a fish can't see the water it's swimming in, and neither can we. And so that is the role of a coach. And in many ways, to me, an organizer is to help other people see the water that they're swimming in, because we have a perspective by being external that they might not have, even on things that affect them very directly. And vice versa. They might see things about us that we don't see about ourselves. That, by the way, as a side note, is one really important thing. I think a one-to-one always goes both ways. So while you might be driving it and calling the purpose of it, that doesn't mean it's not going to influence you. That doesn't mean that that goal is static or unchanging. That doesn't mean that it's not, the shape of the conversation is not determined as much by the other person as by you. There's a difference between providing direction and imposing something unnaturally. Those are not the same thing, and it's important to keep that in mind. So that's also plays into the building of trust and the relationship. It's got to be natural. It can't be forced. So a couple of things to think about, some key principles and tools in approaching a one-to-one. As we were just talking about, relationship building is so crucial. And I think that there's two really important ways that we do that. Two of the most important ways we can do that in the context of a one-to-one are asking questions and sharing stories. And the questions that we ask in the context of relationship building should largely be open-ended. Things like, how did that make you feel? What are some other times you've experienced that? What do you think we should do about that? Maybe that's getting a little ahead of myself, but asking open, curious questions to draw out someone else's experiences and sharing our own experiences when they're relevant or resonant, and building a connection like that. So that's a really important and valuable tool, is building that personal connection. Another of these terms that, again, when I first started hearing it, scared me a little bit because I didn't really know what it meant and everybody else seemed to, was agitation. And I think this is a really important idea. I think the way I think of this is in two ways. I think there's, to me, and this This is just my view, but I think that there's two basic types of agitation. One is agitation around the way that our values are being challenged in the world. So trying to get someone else to see and feel, really feel the ways that the world is unjust, or that a workplace is unjust, or that our state is unjust, or whatever it might be in the context of your campaign, to really feel that injustice and that anger that they experience in their own lives because of the effects that that has on them and their loved ones and their community. So part of it is agitation about the state of the world and the ways that that challenges our shared values and the things that we want to see realized in the world. And the second piece of it is challenging us in how our behavior is in tension with our goals and our self-interest. So this could be, at the most basic level, something as simple as, you know, if I feel really strongly about an issue of social justice or economic justice or whatever it might be, but I'm not doing anything about it, well, there's a tension there because my actions are not in line with my feelings. Maybe I'm even making things worse in some way. So that's sort of more in that first category. But then it could also be something as like, I'm really dedicated to this cause, I'm working really hard, but something's going wrong. I'm not achieving my goals, and it's because there's some underlying challenge that I'm experiencing that's preventing me from fully realizing and acting in accordance with my self-interest, with the goal of achieving our shared purpose through specific concrete steps or just in general. And so agitation is about calling those things out, not in an accusatory way, not through anger, not through hostility or aggression, but through curiosity and questions, and giving someone else the space to challenge themselves and to become agitated on their own about the problems they see in the world or the challenges they experience in their own behavior. This is a pretty dense idea, and it's a complicated one. It's hard to really wrap your mind around, or at least it has been for me. So I'm curious, we'll talk about this more throughout this session, but I'm curious if anyone has any reactions to any of that or anything to add, any additional thoughts. And again, feel free to share in the chat or put yourself in Stack and share any thoughts on agitation, what that means to you. Is that something that makes you feel comfortable or uncomfortable or just confused? Or do you have anything else to share about that? We'll pause while folks either gather their thoughts and share in the chat, or put themselves in Stack and come off mute. And I see while I'm waiting for that Sam says that the joke I told earlier reminds him of the book How's the Water by David Foster Wallace. Thanks, I haven't read that, but I'll check it out because I love that joke. Kim, go ahead.
I recently have just made a decision not to be angry when folks do not seemingly share the same ideology that I have as far as politics goes. I'm in the 14th district. If you know, Marjorie Green Taylor is our state representative. And yeah, I live in an area where it's mostly red. And I have a conversation about, how do you think Marjorie Green is doing for us? Or, you know, even with the January 6th was a normal go-to. Instead of finding fiery topics, trying to understand why do we set ourselves up for the division between red and blue, and let's find the common ground on the things that we at least we can agree about, right? Government should work for the people, and right now it's not. And for me, it's not so much as agitation, because agitation wasn't getting me anywhere but frustrated. And so I just wanted to interject, finding things that we at least can agree on has worked for my one-on-ones when I want to engage people that I don't necessarily know about the world, or at least right now, our state, our community.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that, Kim. That was really powerful. And I totally agree with you. I think it's really important that I think the base of an effective agitation, and to Alexa's, or to Mara's question rather, no, I don't think it always has to be grounded in anger. The basis of any effective organizing conversation, whether it includes an element of agitation or not, has to be understanding, shared understanding, common ground, connection, because it's not about us going in and us just being angry and projecting that anger onto the other person. That's never going to work, especially if they're not already with us. And yeah, to the question Mar raises, I think that there's a lot of emotions that can do this. I think for me, the role of agitation is in identifying problems, challenges, obstacles, ways of overcoming them, and building an emotional stake and connection to why those things are important to do and how we can do them effectively. And so I don't think agitation is always about anger. That's often the way people think of it or talk about it, but I really think it's as much about other things as it is anger. I think anger is often an important component, especially in this first bucket of how our values are challenged in the world, because when I see vast injustices, I get really angry about that. There's also sadness and pain mixed up in that. But personally, I find the anger is can be clarifying and productive for me, but it's less likely to be productive for me when someone is agitating me about a personal challenge that I'm facing. It's not about me getting angry, because then it's anger directed at myself, and that's not productive. So especially in a personal agitation where we're talking about how our behavior is in tension with our self-interest, I think it's usually not about anger. And Alexis says that she was on the receiving end of this conversation yesterday, and it was very effective in terms of realizing how I can be a more effective leader and manager. Thanks for sharing that. That's awesome to hear. Great. Thank you all for sharing those thoughts. I really appreciated that conversation. Another key principle and thing to keep in mind is self-interest. And those who have been through our cohort know the way we talk and think about self-interest. And it's a little bit different from the way I think we generally think and talk about it in our culture. But I think in organizing, self-interest is one of the most important things that we can think about. I would say that I would encourage you to check out either our or our friends over at People's Actions materials around self-interest. Come to one of our other trainings, come into our cohort if you haven't been through that, to get a really in-depth discussion of self-interest and how it relates to power. But at the basic level, I think the thing to keep in mind is what we're looking for in a one-to-one is the overlap of our self-interest and theirs, and a shared purpose. What do we both want together, and how can we achieve it together in the big picture or narrowly in the things that we're talking about here? And so being clear about your own self-interest and the other person's self-interest as you understand it, and helping them to identify, understand, and articulate their own self-interest as well, is an absolutely crucial part of any effective one-to-one. I'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. I've mentioned this already, but purpose and outcome. If you don't have a clear purpose and outcome when you're going into this one-to-one, it's destined to fail because there's no metric of success. There's no way of saying I was successful here. Now, again, that doesn't mean that your purpose and outcome won't change over the course of the one-to-one. There's a lot of ways it can change, and that's totally fine. But you should always have a clear sense of purpose of what is the goal here? What are we trying to accomplish together? And a final point to make is the importance of active listening. And listening, by that I mean listening to understand and not to respond. Remember, like finding moments where you have a question or something to follow up on, maybe making a note of it, but really deeply listening to what the other person is telling you about themselves and their own experiences, the way they interact with and understand the world and their place in it. So these are some of the things that I think are the most important underlying tools and principles of approaching a one-to-one. Let's get now a little bit more into, well, first we're going to zoom out a little bit, and then we're going to zoom in and talk about some more specific tools and structures that I think are really effective and helpful here. So first, I want to go to this next axiom. This is another personal favorite. Could I get a volunteer to come off mute and just go ahead and do it and read this aloud?
If you are moving people to act through truth and for truth as you understand it, then you are organizing them. If you are moving them to act through deception, then you are manipulating them.
Thank you, Laura. Any reactions to this in the chat? How does this make us feel? What do we think about this? And actually, while you're typing and thinking those thoughts, and please do that and share them, I'm going to share some thoughts of my own. And specifically, I want to share a story. Mark says this feels very real. I think this axiom actually specifically, like this literal one, helped me a lot early on in my organizing work because I felt the tension. And I think a lot of people feel this tension that I often felt like I was manipulating people. I often felt like I was forcing people to do things they didn't want to do, or not being, I don't know. I just felt a lot of tension because our role as organizers, as much as anything else, is to move others to action in pursuit of shared purpose, right? And so when our job is to make other people do things, not make, but to get other people to do things, then it's easy to feel like you are manipulating them. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of bad ways to move people to action, right? People use coercion and bribery and greed and guilt and all sorts of nasty things like that. And dishonesty, lies, is a huge one, to move people to action. And if we're doing those things, then we are manipulating or coercing people. And that's bad. That's not sustainable. That's not in line with our values. That's not effective for our goals. We should not be doing those things. But there is a difference between those things and organizing. And the difference is that our organizing is grounded in truth, in how we understand truth and how others understand truth. So I want to share a story, actually, that many of you have heard if you've been through my field session in the campaign cohort. But the moment that I was really confronted with this was when I was working for the Bernie campaign in Iowa. And I had a call with the potential volunteers, cold calling, and he seemed great. So we set up a one-to-one with this guy, this middle-aged painter. And he showed up at the cafe we were meeting at in his white overalls covered in paint, sat down, really nice guy. And by the way, I'll say that I know that he would be comfortable with me sharing these things because I've seen him share some of these stories publicly and for other reasons. But we get to talking and it emerges, we're sharing our stories as you do in a one-to-one, and he shares some really tough personal stories with me. And this time I'm not going to go into the details of it because this is being recorded and, there's a limit here, but he shared some very painful personal experiences he and his family had recently, and really, really difficult stuff. And I'm sitting there listening to it, and I started to feel like just the worst person in the world because I couldn't help connecting it to the cause, the mission of what we were doing, and a reason for him to take action. And I was like, I'm using this moment of vulnerability and the story that he's sharing with me and this painful personal experience to get something that I want out of this guy. And that is wrong and bad. And I am manipulating him, and I feel guilty about all this. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. I sat with it for a long time. It started to change as he became a regular volunteer and a volunteer leader of ours. But there were really 2 moments later on where I had a real shift in my understanding of what the stakes of that interaction were and what its effects were. And one was a few months later in November, a little bit after, if you remember, Bernie had a heart attack not long before that. And then in the hospital, most of the members of the squad in Congress had endorsed him. And so AOC, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, had come out to campaign with Bernie in Iowa, and they were having a joint event down in Des Moines, about an hour away from my region. We had tickets. We had a bus going down and special tickets with backstage access, so we could give these to our volunteers and say, you get to go meet Bernie and AOC. So I go to this volunteer of ours and I say, listen, like, I've got this ticket for you and for your granddaughter, like, go down there and you get to meet them, and we'll get lunch, you'll get the bus, it's going to be awesome. This rainy, dreary Saturday. And he says, Spencer, he says, if I go down, will anybody else be knocking doors in my town, this tiny rural town in Iowa? I say, well, no, not today, but that's okay. Like, this is important. You get to have some fun, bring your granddaughter, it's going to be great. And he says, well, I don't want to go because it's more important to me to be talking to my neighbors than to be meeting Bernie and AOC. And in this moment, I realized that maybe there was something a little more complicated going on than I had realized before, because clearly he was getting something out of this really objectively, in a lot of ways, unpleasant. He's out on his rainy day. It can be a thankless thing. I love knocking doors, but it can be a little thankless, right? So clearly he was getting something out of it if he was choosing that over this really fun, exciting event with people that he was really excited about. And then finally, I actually went back to Iowa last summer. I was clearing out my storage unit years after the caucus. And I met up with this guy in the same cafe we had first met, and he comes in wearing the same paint-covered overalls, and he sits down, and right off the bat, he says, Spencer, I want to thank you. I said, what do you mean you want to thank me? He said, I want to thank you because I got so much from the campaign, and that was thanks to you. And I said, well, what did you get from it? He said, well, I got a community. I had been feeling really lonely and isolated, and I found my people, and I'm still friends with them, and we still talk, and we still work together, and we still do things. And I found a sense of purpose and direction. And I found a sense of power because I'd been feeling powerless in my life to deal with these challenges that my family and I were facing. And I found a sense of power that I could change things. I could do something meaningful and impactful. And and he went on and other things as well. But I realized there that he was getting something out of this as well. And I knew, it's easy to say, well, we're all getting something out of it because we all have a stake in a better world. And that's true, and that's important. But I know for me, that's only part of what motivates me. I do a lot of political work and I put a lot of myself into it, but that's because I get a lot back out of it. I'm driven by the stakes of it, by the condition of the world, by the feeling, the anger and injustice, by these other things. But I get a real feeling of personal fulfillment and empowerment and community and love and other fantastic things like that through this work. But I was telling myself that for some reason he wasn't getting those things, that other people couldn't get those things as well. And in doing that, in telling myself that story, I was failing to fully appreciate his humanity and the humanity of others, because I was seeing myself as being somehow more capable of receiving the value of doing this work than other people. And that's just wrong. That's not true. Other people benefit from this in the same way that we do. If you're listening to this right now, you're probably someone who gets something out of doing political work. And I bet that there's a part of you that feels like that's something that makes you weird. And there's something maybe a little, where it's not everybody that gets it, but a lot of people get this. A lot of people get something out of the experience of doing this. So there's another axiom I like that I almost chose for the top of this, but I wanted to share here instead, which is the role of the organizer is to give people the opportunity to work for what they believe in. To give people the opportunity to work for what they believe in. Because working hard is not always a terrible thing. It's not always an unpleasant experience. I like doing unpleasant things for things, causes that I care about. I get something out of that, and so do other people. And so there's this more, I think, robust sense of what it means to understand someone's self-interest is first, in the big picture, yeah, we all have a stake. I have a stake in a livable planet and universal health care and good jobs and social equality. I have a stake in all of those things because they affect my life and the lives of people I care about. And in fighting for those things, even when we don't win them, I still get something out of that. I get something out of it, and so do the people that we're organizing with. So I just encourage you to keep those things in mind as part of the framing. And that to me is the difference. That's why we're not manipulating, because we're being honest about our agenda, our goals, our sense of our own self-interest and the self-interest of others. And we're pursuing those things together. That's really at the heart of it. Any reactions to that or to this axiom? Again, feel free to drop them in the chat or come off mute. And I see Matthew says, I feel that even within myself, am I being honest with myself if I'm thinking about my thoughts and feelings in terms of big picture ideas about democracy and societal problems? I think that's a big part of it, but there's other things too. And says, I liking this story. Some other thoughts in the chat. And I see Esther raising your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have issue with part as you understand it. It could be manipulated as well. Like the former CEO of Overstock, I think Patrick Byrne, he is one of the instigators of the big lie. And a journalist talked to him the last time, and he's like, oh, that is real. I have to fight for it. So, and the journalist end up asking him, so on a binary question, what you're doing, you either saving the country or you ruin it. And he said, yes. Meaning he's convinced he's saving the country, at least one he wanna show. So as you understand it, I agree with the definition, but it's hidden. I can manipulate people with truth that I convince myself to be true. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that point. Yeah, I think it's really important that we've got to be honest about what our real understanding of truth is, and be careful about our capacity to delude ourselves and to convince ourselves of things that aren't true. And that's, I think, a really important point. So thank you for sharing that. And I see Mar says, I love this, and it reminds me why transparency is so important, because we can't make big empty promises, but we can say that there's something to gain out of doing this. Awesome. Thank you all so much for that. I'm going to keep moving now and talk about 6 steps to an effective one-to-one. And I use this picture of a trail marking because that's how I think of these steps. This is not a script. That's important. This is not a script. You're not reading off of a piece of paper. If you're doing that, it's not going to work, and it shouldn't work. These are like, I think of these like trail markings. They're like blazes on trees where you are walking through the woods and you're looking for these markings and following a path. And when you find yourself getting off the track and losing control and not sure where you're going and it's going wrong, then you look for those blazes to get you back on track. And I think that those really, by the way, are questions, or guiding, probing questions. That's how we can most effectively guide a conversation without unduly directing it. And it's just the way I think of it again is allowing a conversation to flow naturally while also giving it purpose and direction through questions, especially. So the 6 steps that I use, and there's a lot of different versions of this. If you Google it, you'll get 20 different, there's 9 steps to organize, whatever. This is my version of it, so take that for what it's worth. But the way I think of these effective organizing conversations, and again, this could be knocking a door, recruiting a volunteer, talking to a potential volunteer in a more in-depth setting, working with staff. Really, anytime I'm approaching an organizing conversation, I try to think of these things. So the first step, and I'm going to talk about these in more depth, but I'm going to give a quick overview of the full conversation here. The first step is introduction and framing. That's establishing rapport and common understanding, setting the purpose of the conversation. The next is stakes and stories. That's figuring out what each of you has at stake, what the connections are, deepening your personal connection, as well as establishing what each of you has to gain and to lose in whatever you're talking about. The third is agitation, urgency, and obstacle. So identifying the challenges we face either in the world or in ourselves and beginning to address them. The fourth step is the strategy and the plan to win. So giving a concrete direction forward, connecting those things to a bigger picture, maybe a theory of change, maybe an intervention in the problem that we're dealing with. The fifth is the hard ask. That's where we call the question and give someone a choice on whether they choose to take action. And the sixth step is inoculation and next steps. So let's get into those step by step. First, the introduction and framing. This is where you build rapport with the person, you set the terms and the purpose of the conversation, and you feel out where they're starting from. So you might ask, if you're canvassing for a candidate, you might ask, are you planning to vote? And if so, who are you planning to vote for? We're not pushing yet. We're figuring out where the person is starting from, building a little bit of a relationship. I think some things that are important to use here are your energy, smile, be friendly and personable, make the other person want to talk to you as well, having your own clarity of purpose, and being clear about, again, what your goal is here, and curiosity, being really genuinely curious about where the other person is, how they're feeling, how they're doing, etc. But really, I think the goal here again is to feel out where they're starting from and build an initial rapport with the person you're talking to. The second step is stakes and story. And I use this picture because I think of like telling stories around a campfire. That's a very familiar scene for me and one I feel very comfortable in. And I think that's sort of the vibe, is we want to create a sense of comfort and create space and an openness to share your stories and to open up on a deeper level. And our goal here is really, there's a couple of things. First is to figure out what's at stake for the person you're talking to. And by that, I mean, what do they have to gain or to lose in this fight? Again, whether that's a unionization drive or a campaign or an advocacy push or whatever it might be, what do they have to gain or to lose in this fight? It's also about building a deeper relationship, because that's how we get to know each other. That's how we interpret and understand the world, is through the stories that we tell each other and ourselves. And it's about naming your own stakes, which we do, again, through telling stories. So it's not just saying, if I'm talking to someone, I'm not going to say, yeah, I care a lot about healthcare. I'm going to say, yeah, I've been uninsured for periods of time and unable to access my medication. And I know people who have really suffered, even, have gone through some really tough stuff because of the lack of access to healthcare. And I would share those stories because that's why I actually care. And it helps the other person to understand what's driving me, what's motivating me, helps them to feel connected to me, might resonate with their experiences and lead them to open up more. And it's just an important part of our process of ourselves being vulnerable, because we can't expect someone else to open up to us if we're not willing to open up to them. So it's all about identifying the other person's stories and sharing your own and drawing them out. And we do that through questions, again, mostly at this point through open-ended questions. I said before, things like, what are some times when you've experienced challenges around housing or healthcare? Has that affected you? Has it affected people you care about? Tell me about that. How did those things make you feel? I like that question a lot. Do you know other people who have had similar experiences? We're building a sense of shared values, a sense of community, a sense of personal connection, again, centered around our stories. I like to think of the 3 whys, or just sort of 3 levels of probing and follow-up. And so you might say, well, what are some things that are important to you? What are some things you'd like to see change? And they might say, I'd like to see our college education system change. You say, okay, well, what would you like to see change about it? And they might say, well, I'd like to get rid of student loans and make public colleges tuition free. Say, okay, I agree. Why is that something important to you? And they say, well, because I have $75,000 of student loan debt, and my salary is half that, and I can barely afford to pay my housing, and it's crippling debt and stopping me from starting a family. And all of a sudden they've opened up and they start to tell you about their lives and tell you about what's really going on in their lives and what's really impacting them. And we can't hope to connect to or move someone else to action if we don't really understand what they're going through and what they're dealing with, to the extent they feel comfortable sharing. A few last thoughts on this. One thing that Jen always says that I like a lot is when you're thinking of your own story, it's important to share from scars, not from wounds. So there's a limit to how vulnerable we want to be and how open about certain things we want to be. If it's going to be causing you a lot of pain to be sharing certain stories, then you shouldn't be sharing them. We should only be sharing things that we feel comfortable sharing. I think it's good to push ourselves and to think about why we do or don't feel comfortable sharing certain things. Is it just a matter that we feel like it's only us, or that that there's something wrong with us that gave rise to this challenge in our lives? If it's something like that, I think it's worth pushing in and asking yourself, is this actually a story that might be important to share, because it could allow someone else to not feel so alone? But if it's something that's causing you a lot of difficulty or pain, then it's probably something you shouldn't be sharing. But ask yourself why. Your story of self is also really important. This is something, again, that we don't have time to get into really deeply here, but I think is one of the most important tools for effective organizing. Is your story of self is something about, I think it's good to have a lot of different stories of self for different contexts, but basically it's something that illuminates experiences that have affected you or that have produced or shaped you in a deep way, your core values, the ways those values have been challenged in the world and you've been called to leadership to take action around them. I think that a good story of self dwells in a specific moment and feels like, allows the other person to feel themselves there with you. And so developing that story of self is really valuable. I recommend those interested in that, again, come into our cohort if you haven't already, or check out the work of Marshall Gans, who really strongly influenced our approach to the story of self work. And there's a lot of great online resources about that. Yeah, Mar asked if we can do a whole training on story of self. Yeah, we have some of those, and you should come in for some of those, Mar, actually. But yeah, we can talk about developing some more of those, maybe doing some one-off public trainings around story of self, because I love that stuff. And open ears, again, that curiosity piece, that listening is so, so, so important. If someone else is pouring their heart out and you're not there to really listen and take it in, then it's just lost and it's a waste, and they're opening up and maybe sharing really personal, painful things for no reason because you weren't there to accept it. And now there's also, I think, an important point here, which is like, sometimes this can become people just dumping out horrible traumatic experiences on you, and it's okay to sometimes have limits around that and be like, I really, to move the conversation on from that, and you shouldn't feel bad about that either. You've got to find, again, a balance for yourself and for the person you're talking to. So stakes and story is the second step. I'm going to keep moving because I just going through talking a lot, basically. If you want to read this, I like this comment. This is based on something from I think an old labor newspaper from like the 30s or something, but I'm not going to take the time to read it. I like it though, because I think it points to what I see as being one of the core challenges and issues that we face time and time again. So in this next section, we figured out what the other person has to gain and to lose, identified and named our own self-interest, and found the common ground. So the goal here is to connect those stakes to our shared self-interest and values, and to identify the ways those values are being challenged in the world. So the ways that our world is not living up to our values, that's creating injustice or pain for people, and to build some heat. And this is really important, to build some heat, to start to get upset about it a little bit. And often this is anger in like a canvassing conversation. That's often what I'm sort of fishing for emotionally, I guess, is like I feel angry about it. And I think that's often a productive emotion. But again, it's not always anger. Heat can come from a lot of different things, but a feeling of urgency the feeling that this is an important, meaningful challenge that we need to address together with urgency is crucial. So we need to identify that by asking pointed guiding questions. In the story section, our questions are open-ended, are softer, are more inviting. Here, it's a little more pointed and guiding, and we're drawing specific things out. And that needs to be undergirded by our own political analysis. We need to have a clear sense of what's going on. So my favorite questions here are, why do you think it is that way? And specifically, who do you think benefits from that? So I think healthcare is a great example. If somebody shared a really personal story about their experiences with our horrible, horrible healthcare system, I might say, well, that's here, here's my experiences with that. Let's talk about that for a while. Let's talk about how that's affected us. But then why is it like that? Because most countries that are as wealthy as ours, or as advanced and developed as ours, don't have these problems. They have easy access to healthcare. So why is it different here? We spend twice as much per capita on healthcare as other comparable countries, and yet we have worse outcomes. We don't live as long, and our health is worse, and our even our healthcare outcomes are worse. So why is that? And the follow-up question I always use is, who do you think benefits from that? Who do you think benefits from that? Because that is so clarifying. When there's a real serious structural problem in our society and it seems intractable and unchangeable, well, society is really just a collection of people and the choices we make together. And so some people are choosing to keep things that way. And if they're choosing to keep things that way, even though it's hurting and killing people, it's probably because they have a stake in it staying that way. They have something to gain or to lose from it staying that way. So in the case of healthcare, drop in the chat, who do you think benefits from the way that our healthcare system is so broken? Who do you think benefits? That's not rhetorical. What do we think? Insurance companies, yes. Who else? Drug companies, yes. Big pharma, yes. Yes. Keep going, but this is exactly right? It's the very wealthy. It's the people who control our economy and our political system and our society. They benefit from this. So you can see I'm starting to get a little heated about this, and that's what we're looking for. I'm getting mad about this because there are people every day who make the choice to prioritize their profits over people's lives. And I think that's wrong, and I'm mad about it. And I hope you're mad about it too, because it's infuriating. So I'm drawing that out. I'm only offering my analysis to feed. I think that the way to do it is like it's a ping pong. You're feeding off of each other and bouncing and getting upset and getting heated about it, because this is hurting people. This is hurting us. This is hurting you and me. And it's because other people are making moral choices to allow that to happen. So I think this comic, again, is a great example of guided pointing questions. Now, these are asked to a boss figure, but if they were asked perhaps to a worker, these would be a great example of how we are using agitation to identify an obstacle and build some heat around it. That's why I chose that picture. I'm going to keep moving. The next step is the strategy and plan to win. So we've generated heat. The next step is to turn the heat into fire, because fire is what leads to action. The very first axiom in the axioms for organizers is this: an organizer is a social arsonist who goes around setting people on fire. Well, this is the part of the conversation. We've built the heat. Now we're setting the fire. And we are establishing a shared purpose, a path forward, a sense of hope, a sense of power. That's crucial. Building that sense of power that we can change this thing together, and turning it into the desire to take action. So again, we do this through questions. And my favorite question here is, what do you think it's going to take to change that? What can we do about that? And your movement pitch. And this is, because this is, people don't always get there on their own. So sometimes you got to feed it to them, or even if they get there on their own, it's good to build off of it. And here's what I think. I'll tell you what I think it's going to take to change. I don't think it's going to take lawyers, which is weirdly a common answer when I ask this question. I don't think it's going to take just money. I think it's going to take people. I think it's going to take a movement. Because when I look at history, I see that the only time things have ever changed for the better, society has ever gotten more just, has been when millions of people like you and me stood up together and said, I'm sick of this and I'm not going to take it anymore. It's never once happened because people at the top said, this isn't fair, we should make it better for these people that we're screwing over. That's never happened in history. But you know what? The women's rights movement, the labor rights movement, the civil rights movement, the abolition movement, the gay rights movement, all of these things have one thing in common: the word movement. Because that's what they were. They were millions of people standing up together and fighting together for a better world. And that, what I just said, is my movement pitch. I've said that thousands of times, and I feel it every single time. I feel that fire. And this is the moment in the conversation where if you've done everything else right, you've built that personal connection, that heat, you turn it into the fire, and the other person ignites on their own, and they get fired up and they're ready to go. And finally, we land on the hard, not quite finally, but the next step is we land on the hard ask. There's a fork in the road. There's a fork in the road. If you look at the picture, the fork in the road, to give a clear, specific choice on whether or not to take action. Now, we need to remain grounded in the stakes, the shared values, our strategy to win, and it's got to be clearly connected to that. So if the hard ask is something totally disconnected to the rest of the conversation, it's not going to land. It's not going to work. It has to flow naturally from what we said. It has to be connected to our experiences, our values, the obstacle we've identified, and our strategy to overcome it. How does the ask we're making fit into those things? And we do that through direct language, giving people a clear choice, and through silence, through being comfortable with silence and letting the other person make a choice for themselves. They should walk away with a clear understanding of the choice that they have made. Matthew asked if we're running out of time, which is apropos because we in this session are starting to run out of time. So I'm going to answer this very quickly because I have a few more things I'd like to cover. I think you always land on a hard ask. Even if you have to end a conversation earlier than you'd like to, a hard ask is always a good way to end it, or at least a clear next step and follow-up, which is the next step, inoculation and next steps, a clear sense of where you go from here. That might be, can we continue this? Look, I got to go right now, but I really want to continue this conversation. Are you free later today? Something like that. But the final stage of the conversation, inoculation, next steps, the picture is an inoculation needle, like a precursor to vaccines. But the purpose here is to confirm a shared understanding of what we have agreed in this conversation to do, to anticipate and address the reasons they might not follow through, things like self-doubt or busyness and schedule conflicts, things like that, and to create clarity and specific expectation. So we use questions both to understand what they think has happened in this conversation, what they think they're doing next, how they're feeling about that, and to confirm understanding, to make sure that they have the same understanding as we do about what we're doing next. So I'll see you this weekend at what time? Great, at 5 p.m. Yep, that's right. And where are we meeting? Yep, that's right. And what are we doing? Yep, we're canvassing, we're knocking doors. And you should have specific, measurable, time-bound outcomes, clear next steps from the conversation. So I'm going to keep going. I do want to touch on these last things quickly, but I'm going to skim over them a little bit. I want to talk about management one-to-ones. I use a slightly different 6-step process in management one-to-ones. These are ongoing one-to-ones with folks that you manage, volunteers or staff. And I think it's important to always start with an introduction and agenda, to always use this as an opportunity to identify stakes, your shared purpose, your investment in them as a leader, naming why it's important to you that we progress in the way we need to. Management one-to-ones, by the way, generally fall in that second bucket of agitation. It's not so much about the big picture stuff. Sometimes you need that, but it's usually more about the challenges we as individuals are facing in our work. But we still use the challenge in agitation. So we're challenging people to give them the space to challenge themselves, to live up to their values and to act in a way to challenge their own behavior when it contradicts their self-interest. It's important also to have a clear shared diagnosis of the challenge we're facing and develop a clear and shared strategy and intervention in that challenge, and to set clear next steps and follow-up. I'll say, by the way, on all of this, this is derived partly from, again, Marshall Ganz's approach to coaching. Again, some great public materials out there if you want to dig in more deeply on this. I highly encourage you to check those out. Or check in. We might do another session on coaching at some point. Here's a couple of tips on management one-to-ones. Again, I'm sorry, moving quickly. I do want to just wrap up on time. But set a time, a weekly time, I recommend, and don't let it slip. If you have to move it sometimes, reschedule it for that week. Don't let it get away. Good to see you, Matthew. Keep running notes in one document is my advice. This is all just there's other ways to do it that are right, but this is how I approach it. Use a standing agenda, but adapt it as needed. Always be setting clear goals and expectations and next steps. Provide and ask for feedback. That's absolutely crucial, is to not only offer, but look for feedback and follow through and follow up. If you've committed to do something, do it. And if they've committed to do something, follow up on it, make sure it's happened. And finally, yet another axiom: when you're tempted to make a statement, ask a question, which is almost always good advice, especially in the context of coaching and management. Here's a quick sample agenda that is based on my sort of standard agenda for management check-ins. This is a very limited version of it. It's usually a lot more complicated than this. But yeah, just glance over that agenda. Start with the agenda. What are we talking about today? What do you want to add to it? A check-in and debrief. How's it going? What's been going on? What's good? What's hard? Goals. Are we on track? How's it going? If not, why not? If so, what's been working? Let's celebrate that success. Offering and asking for feedback, setting and reviewing next steps. And so I keep running notes and just each week copy this agenda up, adapt it as needed, and try to keep notes on that. Finally, our own next steps. I'm sorry that the end of this was so abbreviated, but be sure to, yeah, I'm sure we can send these out to, Jen, can we send these out to folks who signed up or came today? I bet we can. I'll wait for Jen to, yes, great. Make sure to, if you have not already participated, apply for a campaign manager training program. Our final cohort launches May 10th. This is really the last couple of days to apply. So if you'd like to participate, I strongly encourage you to do so. Jen, do you want to drop that link in the chat? Would you mind? And send that over to some friends and encourage them to apply, especially if you already participated and you got something out of it. If you're here, I'm guessing you thought there was something worthwhile in what we were doing. So I hope you'll encourage any friends you have who might be a good fit to apply as well. Look out for our public classes through Mobilize and our old classes on YouTube. We'll have more to come. We'll be announcing soon what we're doing over the summer. This is our final cohort. The May 10th cohort is the final cohort of the year, but we will be offering some more very exciting public classes and some other cool stuff. So this is just a teaser of that. More to come soon, but keep an eye out on Mobilize and Slack if you're in the cohort alum. And next time you're with us, go ahead and bring a friend. That's all I've got. So let's do a quick checkout. We're right on time. Thank you all so much. I've enjoyed this a lot. I hope you have as well. Let's go ahead and check out in the chat. Give us a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is a and 10 is a woo, is a go fight win, loud and proud. How are you feeling right now? Or if you want to take a look at the feeling wheel, how are you leaving the training? Oh, and Jen, would you mind dropping a feeling wheel in? Well, or just do the numbers. Awesome. Thank you all so much. I'm feeling go fight win. Looking like we're feeling good. Have a great day. We'll see you back soon. Yeah, let's all come off mute and end with a nice loud go fight win. Can we do that for me? Awesome. All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. Let's all come off mute. And we've started now with Deidre James, if you haven't met her yet, one of our staff. She's led us with choreographing our go fight win. So it's go, clap, fight, fist down, win, fist up. All right, everybody got that? Clap, down, up. So it's 1, 2, 3, go, fight, win. All right, awesome. I appreciate you all. Thank you. I'll see you again soon. Have a great day.